Ladies, gentlemen, and exiles of all ages, last week we had a look at all of the classes in the game from a more sort of holistic standpoint, talking about and ranking them based on their positions in the ladder race to level 100, as well as anything that I think affects their standing outside of that too, of course, and especially with patch 0.1.0e happening a couple of days ago, and with people now up in level 98 climbing ever closer towards the actual cap, I thought it'd be fun to once again have a bit of a discussion and rank the classes based not only on these ladder rankings in general, but once again considering any changes to the top builds or their general build philosophies between their playstyles too. For each Ascendancy, I'll generally be talking about their strengths and their weaknesses, the synergy potential that makes them unique from each of the other Ascendancies, and I'll be showing a standout player and build used by the class while doing so they'll have their names on screen, so if you are more interested in their specific setup, feel free to check them out afterwards. At the very bottom of the rankings then, we've got Acolyte of Chayula. At this point, I want to stress that these are all being rated against each other as Ascendancies, and as of this moment, after some recent fixes and changes, none of the Ascendancies are incapable of doing later in-game content, but there's always a scale to sort of comfort to ease, there's always an order between them, and from everything I've seen, the Acolyte of Chayula Ascendancy for the monk just sort of isn't really cutting it comparatively. Going by pure ladder rankings, it's got the lowest top ranking of any Ascendancy's top player, down at 211th, and while it's not inherently lacking, it just doesn't have great specific synergies. You can sort of lean into chaos damage with it, but there are better ways to do that, either through like poisons with Pathfinder, or through some witch variations, and so most people just go with the far more generic Flames of Chayula boosting nodes with this, which just by the way it works means that it gives you buffs that pretty much equally affect the majority of things you could do with it, not really leaning particularly any style of build, not really giving you a specific synergy or a specifically unique way of building, and so it sort of just fits a jack of all trades role where you can build a lot of things around it, and there is another Ascendancy that does that just done much stronger way. Acolyte of Chayula isn't necessarily bad in comparison to the way that the game's difficulty is, it just doesn't have much going for it that you couldn't quite find a way to do better with another Ascendancy at the moment, which is why it is where it is. After that, in 11th place, we have Blood Mage for the Witch, which actually has been getting a bit stronger the past few days after struggling to find its place prior to this. By ladder rankings for leveling and XP gain, the highest Blood Mage is in 105th place, just barely triple digits, and the reason is a lot of the things that it can do that others can do better. However, it does have slightly more of a niche than Chayula Monk does, as there are Ascendancy nodes that boost crit damage and crit chance and synergize around crits in general. As well, it has some unique passive tree nodes that boost minions that this Ascendancy shares with the Infernalist, because it's the other specialization for the Witch, which has the nodes, and no other class gets those as they are minion nodes. For others, they're just pure spell nodes. And so you just have a sort of very tight niche for the class of focusing on crits and using minions, but not focusing entirely around minions, because once you start doing that, the Infernalist and honestly even Gemling Legionnaire actually get better at it long term in endgame scaling too. But where I've seen Blood Mage start to excel is boss damage through Detonate Dead builds, exploding your own skeletal brute for hefty damage, and then you just get to collect all the life remnants and little grim feast remnants for more energy shield as well. And it seems to be pretty effective, honestly. Moving on to 10th then, we've got the Chronomancer. On the XP ladder, their top player is now down to 94th place after being up in the 20s the last time that we talked about this. Part of it is seemingly due to the nerfs to chain freezing enemies that happened within the recent patch, otherwise it could just be that the player has stopped playing quite as frequently. But to be clear, the Ascendancy is in a perfectly acceptable but not crazy powerful state right now. It's not really bad by any means. There are multiple different kinds of builds that are doing quite well for it, whether it being taking advantage of the ability to reset cooldowns with high cooldown abilities that are very strong as their main focus, or just a focus on the ability to jump back in time and get your resources back so you can use really hefty mana costing build too. There are a couple of niches available to this Ascendancy too that make it unique from the others. It just so happens that none of them are particularly brokenly strong at this immediate moment. Then up in 9th place, we have the Pathfinder Ascendancy. Pathfinder as an Ascendancy has one main focus above all else, and it is poison. You can make enemies spread poisons that are applied to them when they die. You can get the ability to double the amount of poisons you can apply to an enemy. You really are just fully built to be able to make poison the main focus of your gameplay. Pathfinders do it, and they do it very well. Currently, the top Pathfinder is 39th in the overall ladder rankings, and they were 14th the last time we checked in on the race to level 100, and this change in its stature is likely mostly due to patch 0.1.0e, which happened recently, which nerfed the damage of Vine Arrow's poisoning effect pretty significantly. This was a pretty big hit for this specialization. Of course, being the poison synergy Ascendancy, it took advantage of the strongest methods of using poison damage in the game, and clearly the developers thought that Vine Arrow was just a little bit too effective at poison. The Ascendancy is still good for sure, even past this, but I've got it placed where it is because its placement dropping on the ladder is indicative of its main limitation, in my opinion, which is that Pathfinder will pretty much always just be as as strong as poison is as a concept. It's the niche that makes it what it is, and there's nothing else it synergizes particularly well with compared to the other Ascendancies, at least until someone comes up with some crazy flask bombing build that is, but I haven't seen that pop up at least quite yet. Up in 8th then we have the Witchhunter, the top player on the ladder being in 47th place, so a worse position than Pathfinder, but as I was just talking about, the Pathfinder is on much more of a downward sort of curve. Witchhunter has also been on a slight downward curve, but a much less steep one, and so in all likelihood I expect this to overtake and pass over the Pathfinder. The main reason is that Witchhunter is generally just sort of very strong. Crossbow skills in general are in a good place, grenades are powerful, and Witchhunter does have a lot of just general power from a combination in the Ascendancy nodes of just really good group clearing boosting through Zealous Inquisition, which gives a 10% chance for enemies to explode when they die and do 100% of their maximum life as damage to enemies around them. They can also get both Culling Strike to instantly kill low health enemies, or Devastating Strike to have a chance to just cleave off the top 30% of any enemy's health bar too. This is especially good for the tankier bosses that exist too, and with that in combination with Culling Strike, you really only have to deal with the middle section of most enemies' health bars. And then if you choose to instead work in a bit more safety, the high-end builds can work in Sorcery Ward without too much of a hit to their overall physical survivability, while gaining quite a bit of elemental defense. After that we have our 7th place Ascendancy, which is the Warbringer. This one has been impressive to me in its own way since release. 22nd currently on the leaderboards, which is a step up from before, and it's occupying a very specific space based around just absolutely bombing through enemy armor as a way of destroying everything on the screen. And nothing does it better than Warbringer does, thanks to its Ascendancy nodes that not only make it easier to break armor just with your hits in general, but also you can apply armor break below 0 armor too, putting enemies to negative armor, and just use that as a way to blow things up. Pair that with a bunch of armor break passives on the tree, use skills like Stampede to just hit everything on the screen, and watch the Armor Explosion support gem and Herald of Ash overkill explosions blow up entire packs in a single button press. This was nerfed as a combo in the recent patch for lower level characters specifically, as they made it so the explosions from Armor Explosion can't also trigger Armor Explosion, which is the main way of sort of triggering the domino effect before, but with proper endgame gear and the rest of your skill tree worked out as well, it still comes together just fine in the endgame and can do even tier 15 maps. And the survivability has actually gone up a ton recently for the Ascendancy, with a really fun combo that was started to be used of the Svalin unique shield, which gives you lucky block chance. If you have 40% block chance and the attack would get through that, you then get to roll 40% block chance a second time. It's a second shot at blocking every time an enemy attacks you. If it fails again, the attack of course does end up getting to hit you, but it gives you a second shot. And the thing is, even though the shield itself only has a 26% base block chance, which is really low, you completely remove that restriction with an Ascendancy node unique to Warbringer that makes any shield have 40% base chance to block regardless of the shield's actual values. Then you have the Turtle Charm Ascendancy node as well, which lets you block damage from all hits even with the shield not raised with a bit less block chance, and this overall lets you end up in very high-end gear with something like 60% block chance that also gets a second chance to roll if it fails the first time, while still wielding a two-handed mace in your main hand due to the Giant's Blood notable passive. And even if power-wise it's down in 7th place, I just find this to be a very fascinating class as far as the synergies within. Next up in 6th place then we have the Infernalist, with the top player being in 10th place on the ladder right now. So we're getting up to the point where these Ascendancies just have reached obscenely faster levels of speed and power, at least as far as, getting through large amounts of mobbing through actual maps, and the simple reason is that the things that they synergize with in particular are either related to skills that are tuned very strongly right now to begin with, or they are just incredibly strong at scaling damage as gear improves further. For Infernalist, this is from a combination of an Ascendancy node that lets you gain 1 maximum spirit for every 25 maximum life that you have, as well as one that lets you gain maximum energy shield for every 8 maximum life that you have. This means maximum life, which is one of the best survivability increasing modifiers you can get on endgame gear to scale upwards with anyways, also boosts your damage output by giving you more spirit on an Ascendancy that focuses around using minions anyways, and then you gain a ton of energy shield as a bonus anyways for even more survivability. And that's on top of the Infernal Hellhound bonus minion, which just exists as a survivability tool to begin with. Strong Ascendancy, clear synergies, and a method of infinitely scaling upwards as your gear gets better. After that in 5th place we've got the Titan. I've taken some slight liberties here, as Titan's top player is actually in 5th as far as overall ladder position, but they are ahead of the top player of 2 other Ascendancies that I am ranking higher than it. The reason for this is Titan specific scaling options means that it takes a hell of a lot of effort and good gear to reach what the top Titans are achieving, and when compared to the other highest effort requirement builds that I've seen, it's simply less rewarding for the amount of gear required to do it. That said, Titan's strongest parts of its Ascendancy are the ability to gain 50% increased effect from your small passives on the tree, percent scaling strength bonuses from your your Ascendancies as well, a bunch of maximum life to scale life regeneration off of from Ascendancy nodes, and then Crushing Blows, which lets you heavy stun any enemy that is primed for it, meaning that you can apply heavy stun to enemies that have 40% of it, even built up for regular enemies, scaling upwards with higher rarities of enemies. Then you combine that with the Devastate support gem, which fully breaks armor when you apply a heavy stun to things, and then Armor Explosion support, which causes an explosion when an enemy's armor breaks, then using Herald of Ash like Warbringer does to spread the overkill damage around, and then just getting really high strength using Giant's Blood to use a two-handed mace in the one hand, and still be able to use a shield in your offhand for survivability. Then funneling all of that into boosting your fire damage and applying ignites as well. Essentially, this is the strongest stat scaling class for specifically strength, which is obviously somewhat limiting as far as build style and weapon choice, but for what it works for, it really does work for. Moving on to 4th place then, I've got the Invoker Ascendancy, whose top player is 4th overall in the ladder rankings. This has benefited significantly from just having Ascendancy specific nodes that synergize incredibly well with some of the strongest skills and build concepts that have popped up so far. It's got an Ascendancy node that boosts trigger skill damage and meta skill energy generation, which players got a ton of mileage out of before the cast on skills all got nerfed in a recent patch, and since then players have mostly just been taking advantage of massive spirit stacking from an Ascendancy node that gives you spirit based on body armor stats, and using this to run a ton of aura skills for passive bonuses, the persistent buff skills, including using multiple herald skills, mixing lightning and cold damage together for tons of damage for these combinations and their ailments, and then they also just have natural crit and element synergies too, all throughout, with the ability to make critical hits ignore resistances that aren't negative, and even trigger a bonus skill on critical hits too if you go that route. Generally, this class just has ways to scale element in strong ways for the investment required, ways to scale spirit without requiring specific modifiers on your gear, and ways to scale trigger skills for whenever those do happen to be powerful. So it has multiple avenues of potential synergy, and for the most part, these synergies all work together with each other too to make each other stronger. So this Ascendancy should always be strong with one build archetype or another, unless they just completely rework how the nodes function. In 3rd place then, I've got the Deadeye, despite their top place player actually being an 8th overall in the ladder right now. This is just consistently amazing for me to watch the gameplay of. Incredible clear speed, obliterating packs with like a button press, and bosses with a handful of presses of a different button. It has massive move speed as well due to Tailwind, and it's all just based around being able to hit ludicrous attack speed due to the Tailwind nodes and the Ascendancy in 1st place, and then also getting a bonus projectile from your Ascendancy too. This just synergizes incredibly well with skills that work based on hit count, the main one being a Lightning Rod, which pulses out damage every time it is hit with a chain lightning effect, so the faster you can fire out chain lightnings with something like Lightning Arrow or Orb of Storms, the quicker you proc Lightning Rod, which is the main damage of a lot of Deadeye builds. Its ladder placement may be worse than the top Invoker and the top Titan, but the pure simplicity of the best playstyles within this, the power of both mobbing and bossing with it, it just looks really just comfortable as all hell, more so than the other two do in my opinion. Because while the ladder positions are of course important to consider, that metric doesn't cover every aspect of what makes a class or Ascendancy good. Moving on to 2nd place, this is where I've got the Stormweaver today, and some people are going to be quite questioning of this, mostly because just like the last time we looked at the ladder rankings, the top player is a Stormweaver, now the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th players also Stormweavers, 6 of the top 10, 11 of the top 20, you get the idea. Stormweaver is something that is both very popular and capable of an extreme amount of power for a large number of different players. It doesn't require ridiculous gear to achieve, and a good part of the reason is just how well this Ascendancy is scaling with synergies that exist outside of the Ascendancy nodes themselves. By this what I mean is the most powerful nodes by far in the Ascendancy are the ones that give you permanent Arcane Surge, which is increased cast speed and mana regeneration, but then also adding on the node that makes the effective Arcane Surge increase by 1% per 15 maximum mana that you have. This means that you can scale maximum mana for more damage output extremely well as just giving you the increased mana regen means that you can scale levels of skills without having to worry about the increased cost. Intelligence as a base attribute gives you bonus maximum mana too, so gaining loads of intelligence is a good way to scale this, and there is a notable on the passive tree that gives you 2% increased lightning damage per 10 intelligence that you have, so now if you focus on just getting loads of intelligence, you have a ton of cast speed and lightning damage. Then there's the Archmage aura, which makes spells gain a massive boost by giving extra damage as lightning damage for every 100 maximum mana that you have, so you have what is essentially a multiplicative lightning scaler with your intelligence, and the theoretical downside of this Archmage aura is it makes your skills cost way more mana, but again, you are scaling your maximum mana anyways, you are scaling your mana regeneration through a scaling Arcane Surge, and you're scaling your power through mana and intelligence as a general concept, so this counteracts the negative of it entirely. Then there's just further things that you can do with this, like the Mind over Matter notable, which makes you take damage from your mana pool before your health pool, so your survivability also scales off of your maximum mana gains. And the recent addition to this combo is the unique shield that gives 600% increased the normal effect of socketed soul cores within it, combined with the soul core that gives increased maximum mana percentage, and then there just goes absolutely haywire into the combo to create just absolute nastiness. And yet, there is another one above this. In first place, we've got Gemling Legionnaire. The top player for this Ascendancy in the ladder race is actually 44th place. So if we were purely talking about those rankings, this Ascendancy would be 8th out of the 12. But the reason for me putting it here is that this Ascendancy scales harder and harder the more you can put into it. The more perfect your setup gets, your build, your skills, your gear. And the main reason for this is a combination of different avenues to high-end synergy within the Ascendancy nodes, but most commonly, the ability to use extra skill gems and give you extra skill slots in general, combined with the ability to use 2 copies of the same support gem across your loadout, but then either scaling bonus quality to all skills, which can be quite good, or scaling all attribute gains. You can gain just increased percentage all attributes from some of the nodes in here too, and also double the inherent bonuses from all attributes, which can then be used to create the coolest and wackiest thing I have personally witnessed so far in the game. A build that is like putting together the pieces of Exodia with the ridiculous cost to make it function, combining a unique quarterstaff that increases the area of effect of all attacks dependent on your intelligence, increased attack speed based on your dexterity, and increased damage based on your strength. There are also unique gloves that it uses that give you increased attack speed per dexterity and lightning damage per intelligence, which is also something that you can do with your passive tree anyways, which we talked about earlier with the Archmage. A unique chest that gives a % increase to all attributes per socket filled, which you can corrupt for a third socket to make it a 15% all attribute increase, along with a bunch of other increases too. There's also a unique amulet which gives 120 to all attributes, a unique helmet that gives % increase to all attributes again, and then just filling out the section of the passive tree that gives you a lot of more all attribute gains and gaining as many of the various attributes as possible from the remaining equipment too, mostly with a focus on intelligence out of the 3 to really just juice the area of effect and the lightning damage. And the result of this is just insane. You could also pair it with the Mind Over Matter passive, which we just talked about before, which makes your survivability scale with your mana pool, which is boosted by your intelligence, and you're boosting intelligence a ton anyways, and this literally can screen clear tier 15 maps with a single auto attack, and that's the lowest effort version of it, but it requires the most ridiculous setup of gear I've ever seen someone have in the game so far to achieve it, with equipment that is just incredibly expensive if you were to try and put it together through trading, and near impossible to reliably get without trading. But it's something that Gemling Legionnaire uniquely mixes with and boosts, and it's only one of multiple ridiculous hyper endgame builds that will eventually be thought up for this Ascendancy. That just about does it for today then, everyone. Each of the Ascendancy is ranked with a heavy influence from the current ladder race to level 100, but of course with my own thoughts and knowledge from seeing a bunch of different builds and players actually playing the game, and a consideration of just how the class will be able to ride out balance changes to specific skills in the future too. Like if you liked the video, subscribe to the notification bell for more, and most importantly, ladies and gentlemen, until next time, stay sweet.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.